Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the reporting training webinar for OSBM, so the State Budget Office Administered Grants. My name is Cole Jordan. I'm the grant manager on the team, and we've got the rest of our team, including a new person that we're excited to introduce everyone to. She'll be reaching out to her grant portfolio as soon as we get her fully onboarded. But we've got James Chatham, Christy Doy, Amy Perry, who's our newest member, and then Carmen Warren. So appreciate y'all being here this morning on what is the reporting deadline for this quarter. So we'll jump in on some fund management and also some reminders on what expenses can be what expenses you can make with the grant funds that you have, and maintaining the documentation for that. And then we'll get into the quarterly reporting requirements, as well as a demonstration on how to submit your reports. And then at the end, we'll open it up to a Q&A. So there is a little question mark box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. If you click on that, you can enter in any questions that you have. There's never a bad question, and we find that they can be really helpful for other folks on the call to hear what other grantees are experiencing and have questions about. So please don't be shy and put those questions in the Q&A box. Feel free to wait till towards the end in case we go over your question in the meantime. But again, happy to repeat anything, and if there's something maybe you don't think we covered that you want us to go over, just pop it into the Q&A box and we'll get to it at the end. And again, that's a little question mark box at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. All right, so all of the stuff that we talk about today is related to either legislation that determined the rules and requirements for your grant, or the North Carolina Administrative Code and the State Budget Manual. So allowable uses of grant funds, a few reminders. Funds are to be used for non-sectarian, non-religious purposes only. If you are a nonprofit, then no more than $140,000 in state funds, including interest earning from those funds, may be used for the annual salary of any individual employee of your nonprofit organization. Any interest earnings on your funds must be used for the purposes for which the grant was awarded. If you have travel, mileage, meals, or lodging, or other types of travel expenses, they should be reasonable and supported by documentation. So make sure if you're covering any mileage that you've got the appropriate travel logs and any supporting documentation that would prove that the expenses were spent for that purpose and who it was going to. If you have questions at any point about the supporting documentation you should have on hand, please reach out to our office or your grant administrator. We'll be happy to help. Expenditures by either you as the recipient or your subrecipient shall be in accordance with the cost principles outlined in the Code of Federal Regulations, which is 2 CFR Part 200. This really refers to reasonable costs. So when you're using state funds, you shouldn't be purchasing items that aren't at a reasonable cost, right? So you shouldn't purchase something that is overly priced, such as $10,000 laptop, right? You want to be good stewards of state funds. Some more responsibilities as a grant recipient is you must maintain reports and accounting records that support the allowable expenditures of state funds. These are state dollars, and so you want to make sure you've got all supporting documentation that proves that the expenses are allowable, which are determined by your scope of work and state legislation. So you want to have every type of backup to prove by every penny that it was spent appropriately. Recipients and subrecipients shall make available all of those reports and records for inspection by our office or the state auditor during any oversight, monitoring, or evaluation purposes. So when you're submitting expenses, we do not require you to submit the supporting documentation at the time of your expenses needing to be submitted. So during the reporting process, when the quarterly deadlines come around, you're submitting expenses but not attaching supporting documentation. However, you do have to maintain that documentation for up to 5 years after the project is complete, and we may request it at any point in time. If you do not have supporting documentation, you won't be able to submit that expense. And we'll have to find another expense to use the grant funds on. So you must also, if you have any subrecipients, you must ensure that they also comply to all of the requirements that you are responsible for following, which are all outlined in your contract. And our advice is, if you are subgranting, to do it on a reimbursement basis. This allows you to have the supporting documentation in hand prior to them making any expenses. And it also allows you to review and approve or disapprove of their expenses prior to them moving forward. Grant funds must be accounted for in a separate fund and accounting structure with the recipient central accounting or grant management system. This shall include accounting for any interest earned on these funds. This is really important and something we find our grantees consistently having issues with. So these are state funds. If you've got multiple grants, all of them need to be treated separately and held in different accounts or through a fund accounting system. This is even if you received a grant, it's going towards a certain project, and the grant's only going to cover a portion of it. You still have to keep it separate. You can't put it with the other funds for that particular project that maybe you have another grant for. It all needs to be treated separately. The only time that you can hold it in the same account is if you have a fund accounting system that can track the expenses through the fund accounting system, which I'll break down a little bit more clearly in a moment. All expenses shall be managed in a detailed manner that supports fully transparent accounting of all financial transactions associated with the grant funding. And as I was speaking about before, you cannot commingle your grant funds with any other sources of funds. So that means you shouldn't be putting these grant funds with any, your general fund or another granting fund or some private donations. Those should not be in the same account unless you have a fund accounting structure that you can account for all of the sources of funds separately. All right, so a little easier breakdown of this. You've essentially got two options. So if you're typically a larger organization that handles lots of different funding sources, then you may have a fund accounting system. If that's the case, then your accounting system will support fund accounting where each source of funds is accounted for separately. And again, that's typically our larger organizations. Option two, if you are not able to have a fund accounting system, then you should hold it in a separate bank account. That way, if we ask you for your general ledger, we can see that that bank account directly matches the expenses according to what you've submitted to us as well, right? So it should be like a one-to-one. The expenses you're submitting to us match exactly what's on your bank statement, and therefore we know that the grant funds were spent appropriately. All right, so additional reporting requirements. So all grantees are required to certify that your funds were received or held and used for the purposes for which they were awarded. These questions are all on your quarterly performance report. You also have to provide an accounting of all funds received, held, used, or expended. So that you accomplish by submitting the expenses and any interest earned. And then you are required to report on activities and accomplishments undertaken and any performance measures established on your scope of work. This is required for all of our grant recipients. The one difference is some of our grantees will also be required to submit a yellow book audit. And that's determined by the total amount of state funds, state grant funds that your organization received within your fiscal year. So the threshold amount has changed since June 30th, 2024. So prior June 30th, 2024 and any fiscal year before then, the threshold is 500,000, and that is whether you received, held, or expended. State requirements are very different than federal. Federal only requires you to submit a yellow book audit if you expended a certain amount of money. The state requires it if you even just held and received that money. The threshold changed to match the federal requirements, which were at the time 750,000. But then they increased it to $1 million. So if you happen to have had a fiscal year end fall between July 1st, 2024 and September 30th, 2024, then the threshold amount of total state grant funds that would require you to submit a yellow book audit is 750. But in moving forward, if your fiscal year ends October 1st, 2024 or later, so if your fiscal year ended December 31st or 30th, 2024, then the threshold to submit a yellow book audit is 1 million. This can be a single or program specific audit. So if your organization already has a single audit done annually, you can use that as fulfilling your yellow book audit requirement. You just want to make sure the grant funds are included within the scope of that single audit. Alternatively, you can do a program specific audit that's only focused on the grant funds. This is a much more, this is a cheaper option, but you just want to make sure that no matter what you're choosing, that they are using the generally accepted government auditing standards, which is known as the Yellow Book. So again, a little simplified breakdown. If your fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024 or before, the amount is 500,000 that requires you to submit a Yellow Book audit. If it happens to fall in between these two dates, then it's 750. And then any fiscal year end that is after October 1st, 2024, the new threshold is $1 million for the total amount of grant funds that you received by the state. So that's, if you received a grant from our office for 500,000 and you received a grant for 500,000 from the Department of Environmental Quality, that would mean you would fall into this category of requiring a Yellow Book audit. Yellow Book audits are due 9 months after your fiscal year ends. So if your fiscal year ended June 30th, 2024, and you did hit that threshold amount, then your audit was due at the end of March of this year. So if you are behind on that, just reach out to your grant administrator. We can work with you on that. Everything we speak about today about reporting is going to be uploaded to Smartsheet, including your Yellow Book audit. You can charge the grant to pay for your Yellow Book audit, and most full service CPA firms are able to assist you with this. We have come across some folks that have some issues. We've got a lot of resources on our website, and we can help assist you if you have you or your CPA firm has any questions, including providing a compliance supplement for them. So more about monitoring and auditing. As mentioned before, you are required to maintain all supporting documentation. So invoices, receipts, travel logs, time logs for time worked. All of that needs to be maintained in your records for up to 5 years after the grant has been closed out. We highly recommend having everything saved in one place. We've seen a lot of turnover in all types of organizations, and it makes it difficult when the next person comes in to find those documents. So please try to be organized and keep that in a place that secures you and any future employees so that all of your expenses are allowable should any auditor come in and request that information in the future. So as mentioned, all grant recipients are subject to being audited, inspected, and monitored by our office at any time. And grantees must provide OSBM and the state auditor with any records and access to financial statements to support internal audit, financial reporting, and related requirements. The current reporting deadline that we are at is to cover January 1st through March 31st, which is due today, April 10th. So please go ahead and get that in as quickly as possible. But you never have to wait until today to submit your reports. You have access to Smartsheet for the whole grant cycle. We highly recommend submitting expenses and interest earned as it occurs. This helps to keep you familiar with the system and how to upload it rather than needing a reminder every quarter as to how it works. And it also makes it so you're not having to cram so much at the end. We do send out monthly reminders about different reporting requirements, as well as at the first of the month before a quarterly performance report is due. So we try our best to keep y'all informed and aware of what's coming up. All right, so when we talk about Smartsheet, this is what it looks like. It's essentially an Excel spreadsheet online where you submit documents. The individuals who receive this access to your Smartsheet is the point of contact and the contract signer that we have on file. We highly recommend that the point of contact be the person submitting reports. This is who we will reach out to if something is incorrect about something that was submitted. So it makes our jobs a lot easier to have that point of contact be the administrative person so that we can really get the corrections needed and get that communication done as quickly as possible, especially considering that the contract signer tends to be someone who's a little bit further removed from the grant and is overseeing the program. And our system only allows for one point of contact. However, we can provide whomever you would like in your organization to receive Smartsheet. Just reach out to your grant administrator. The question we get so often is that the Smartsheet's view only. I can't edit it. That is on purpose. You should only have view only access. In fact, if you have any access beyond view only, please let us know because we need to make that change for you. It should only be view only for all of our grant recipients. The way to submit anything is to click on this hyperlink. They are all the same hyperlink, and I'll walk you through the process in a moment. But that's the link that opens up the form where you can submit information. This link talks to your Smartsheet, and once you fill out that form, it'll enter in the information onto your Smartsheet. So once you click on this hyperlink, it opens up a form that looks like this. You will fill out your name, you'll choose the submission type, and then additional questions will pop up, and that's how you fill it out. Once you hit submit, you'll go back to your Smartsheet, and then you'll see it listed there. This is for anything that you need to report during the quarterly performance or during the quarterly reporting period. So once you get to the end of the quarter and you need to submit your quarterly performance report, you want to click on the link and submit it through the form. Same with expenses, interest earned, yellow book audit, all the above. It all gets submitted to Smartsheet. So what and how to report? So expenses should not be aggregated. You need to submit them as individual expenses. Individual submissions made by any subrecipient. So if you have subrecipients, do not list your disbursement to your subrecipient. We need to see how the funds were actually spent by your subrecipient. So you're not saying I gave $10,000 to the fire department and listing the fire department as a vendor. Rather, you're going to submit the subrecipient's name, which would be the fire department, and then who did they pay and what expenses did they make with those $10,000. Employee expenses should be submitted by each pay period. Again, another reason why you should submit expenses as they occur, so you're not having to catch up too much at the end. Interest earned should be submitted as it is received. For approved expenses incurred before receiving your funds, report the actual date of the expense and the vendor that was paid for the expense, not as a reimbursement to your organization. So if you have an invoice that is an allowable expense for your grant, but it was prior to the performance period, but you are paying it during the performance period, then you should submit the date of the payment. That way it'll be an allowable expense that we can approve of. And as another reminder, supporting documentation is not submitted during the quarterly reporting process and is only required to be submitted if requested by OSBM or the state auditor. Oh, sorry, it jumped ahead on me. All right, so sales tax is a topic that we run into quite often because every organization has a little different way of doing it based off of their eligibility to be to receive reimbursement on sales tax. So it is state law that if you are eligible for sales tax exemption, you cannot use the grant funds on sales tax unless you are requesting a reimbursement from the state, and then you'd have to use that reimbursement back on the grant, right? Because you can't use state funds to pay for sales tax and then also get reimbursed from the state for sales tax. Now, if you are a nonprofit and you're like, I don't know if we're tax exempt, if you are, or maybe you don't request reimbursement, regardless, you are eligible for tax exemption, and therefore you cannot use grant funds on your sales tax, because we don't know if in a year or two that someone else may in your organization try to request that. And so we want to protect both your office and our office to make sure that we have everything squared away and are appropriately handling state funds right now. So there are a couple of different options, and we can talk with you about this individually if you have any questions. But essentially, our sales tax example is right here. The receipt is, the subtotal is $100 for 5 books at $20. And then the tax is $8, making a total of $108. So if you're not eligible for tax exemption, you're a private entity or a community college, then you would report the full vendor total amount and $0 in sales tax. Because in this case, you can use grant funds on sales tax because you are not eligible for tax exemption. Now, if you are eligible for tax exemption, whether you request reimbursement on sales tax or not, then you have 3 options. The first option, this is kind of like the most clear way of doing it so that it matches your invoices. So you would submit the vendor total amount, so the $108, and then you would put $8 in the sales tax column. What that'll do is tell the system that you only used $100 of the grant funds, but it also matches your records if that is something you would prefer for it to match like 1-to-1. But for it to correctly reflect that grant funds were not used on sales tax in the system. Option 2 is that you did not use sales tax you did not pay for sales tax with grant funds, and you're already gonna separate this out. Say that your finance or accounting team always separates out the sales tax, and in that case, you can put the subtotal into the vendor total and then 0 into sales tax. Option 3, which is probably the more complicated one because you have to request the reimbursement from the state, which can take some time depending on when you submit the request and when the state is able to provide that return to you. This can be tricky if you've got a reversion date because maybe you don't get that reimbursement until after the grant is completed, and therefore you have to continue to submit reports So this is definitely the more complicated one in terms of like the steps you have to take. So, but if this is your preference, then you would report the full vendor amount, the 108 and 0 in sales tax. And then once you receive that reimbursement back from the state, you would submit that to your Smartsheet. Again, if you have questions on that, please reach out to us or add a question in the Q&A box. We can go over it now. But yeah, and if you've entered in expenses and you need something corrected, we can always do that for you as well. All right, so the performance report, so this has to be submitted every quarter. It's the narrative report where you tell us what's been going on with your grant. What's very important is to download the PDF. Make sure you're not filling it out in your web browser. Otherwise, it's going to show up blank and not save it. So we've run into a number of issues where grantees think they submitted a filled out form, but it's totally blank, and it's because they didn't save it to their browser. So back to saving your information into one place, I would download the PDF from our website and save it into that folder with all of your other grant information and fill it out from there, and then go to upload it. Now, if you're ready to close out your grant, there's a checklist for that. And I will show you where you can see the Smartsheet summary when we do our demonstration. But the main things to cover are to ensure it, if you think your grant's ready for closeout, these are the things that you want to double check. So you want to make sure that all the expenses you submitted are included in your scope of work. So it doesn't necessarily, some of your scopes of work may have been more general and not, talked about construction. We don't need to see, like, it doesn't have to be line item, but a general idea, like it was included in your scope of work and we approved of it. Secondly, you would need to make sure all expenses are submitted for your grant and that the balance on your Smartsheet is at 0. So what's really important is you want to make sure you're only submitting the expenses paid with grant funds. So if you have an invoice that maybe you used multiple sources of funds to pay for, so like you had $1 million contract or invoice with your builder and you're only using $500,000 of the grant funds, then only submit $500,000. Otherwise, you'll end up with a negative balance. All interest must be submitted in the amount as it was received. If you are a grantee that hits that grant funding amount that requires a Yellow Book audit, you want to make sure you've submitted that for every fiscal year that you are required to. And then your final report is just a final quarterly performance report. Just use the same form and make sure to state that all funds have been spent and the project related to the grant is complete. We also have a new update to Smartsheet, so you can see if you are in compliance with your QPRs, so your quarterly performance reports. To check that, you would also go to your sheet summary and scroll down a bit, which I'll show you in a moment. If it says in compliance, then you have submitted all quarterly performance reports for each required reporting period. If it says mismatch, then you've either submitted your quarterly performance early this quarter, which is fine, anytime between April 1st and 10th, that is totally fine. Or you accidentally chose the wrong reporting period. Mismatch normally can be fixed. And if once April 11th rolls around, it should go back to in compliance. The issue that you want to be most aware of is if it says not in compliance. So that means you're missing a quarterly performance report for one or more of the required reporting periods. And to figure out what reporting period you're missing a quarterly performance report, you want to continue to scroll down the Smartsheet summary, and it'll show you each quarter and whether or not a quarterly performance report was due. If it says no, then there's not going to be a status of it. But once it starts saying yes, you'll be able to see, was it submitted or is it missing? And once you've identified the quarter it was missing for, you can just download that quarterly performance report and fill it out for that missing quarter, and then go ahead and submit it. If you believe your grant's ready for closeout and you no longer need to submit quarterly performance reports, reach out to your grant administrator and we'll try to work you through the closeout process. All right, so we've developed some instructional videos that are available on our website, which I will show you how to get to, and then we'll start our demonstration. So our website is osbm.nc.gov. So it's Office of State Budget and Management, osbm.nc.gov. You can either click on the popular topics, directed grants, or you can go to stewardship services and scroll down to directed grants. This is kind of a general overview for all agencies. Then you want to click on OSBM administered grants. You'll scroll down. These are the documents you had to submit to receive your funding. So you want to click one more time into reporting, and there's also some other topics that you can see here. So making sure that you're avoiding fraud, targeting grant funds. We know of a few instances where folks have come across this, so make sure that you are aware of how to avoid that. And then we've got an FAQ site too for frequently asked questions. But for the reporting information, I'm going to click here. And then you've got all of this helpful information. So your quarterly performance reports, you can click on this hyperlink, open it up into a new tab to show you in just a minute. And then you've got a whole breakdown. So the reporting dates are there, what to report. This goes another link to the quarterly performance report. This mentions those expense rules that I just talked about a moment ago, how to report, a little piece on the reporting sales tax, and then our upcoming training links, which we will start doing some more topic specific webinars in the future. So if you have ideas for topics you'd like for us to cover, please let us know. We'll be happy to add it to our list. And then reporting training resources. So our grant team is currently managing over close to 1,600 grants, and we've got we've got 5 people on our team. So it's a lot. So as you can imagine, April 10th rolls around, there's a lot of requests and questions. So that's why we've got all of these great resources on our website. If it's been 3 months, you haven't submitted any reports, we've got a quick video on how to upload your quarterly performance report. And please use these resources. It may be beneficial in both for your timing and getting a response from us, and also for our ability to get back to our grantees as quickly as possible. So yeah, this is our wonderful reporting page. So the quarterly performance report, which you should download, open up in a new link. I'm going to download it to a folder that I know has all of my information about my grant, right? So I'm going to date it for today. I'm going to save it there, and then I'm going to make sure I open it up into Adobe. That way it's not in the browser. I can fill it out here and save it and then upload it in a moment. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Smartsheet, because before we fill out our quarterly performance report, I want to make sure I've got all of my expenses submitted. So Smartsheet, if you go to it, a lot of times you're going to land on this home page. So to find your reporting sheet, you want to click on the Browse tab on the left-hand side. Once you click on the Browse tab, it's going to open up your workspaces. And under there, you're going to see all of the reporting sheets that you have access to. It may look a little overwhelming to see all of these, but you're only going to see the amount that you have access to, which would be the grants that your organization has received from the state budget office. So I'm going to open up our example. But for instance, like the city of Asheboro has a number of grants that we have administered to them, and each one has its own reporting sheet. All right, so I'm going to open up my example for training, and this is what it looks like, right? It's a essentially an Excel doc. You're going to have your link to data entry form for this grant. That's where I'm going to click into so that I can submit anything, right? I can't type in here. It's view only. So I'm going to click on this link in a moment so that it opens up the form. But just to show you around a bit, the top 3 lines are examples, just to show you what should show up should you submit that type of expense. So like a subrecipient, you would have your subrecipient name here and the vendor for whomever they paid. And then you're going to see your full list of expenses and anything that you've submitted for your grant. If you continue to scroll over, you'll see additional information. And there are a lot of columns because there's a lot of different types of expenses, including employees and property purchases. All right, so let's say I want to submit an expense. I know I can't type in here. I have view only access, which is what I should have. And so I'm going to click on any of these links because they're all the same. Open it up, you can see all exactly the same. And I'm going to click on the link to data entry form for this grant. So when I click on it, it opens up that form that we were looking at an image of earlier. I'm going to check the top and it's got my grant ID, the 5 digits, it's 000, which should match the top of my Smartsheet. And I'm going to start filling it out. So the name of the person entering the data, which is myself, Cole Jordan, and I want to submit an expense. So since I chose expense as a submission type, these are the questions that are going to pop up. If I had chosen interest earned, different questions are going to pop up. So depending on what submission type you choose is going to determine the additional questions that show up. So I'm going to choose expense. This is for expense made by us, the recipient. If I had any subrecipients, this is when I would choose subrecipient and enter in the name there. But we're going to choose recipient for this example. The date, this is for last quarter, so it was on March 12th. You can either put in the invoice date or the expense date. Just make sure you're consistent with whatever you're doing for submitting expenses. The item category matches what's on your scope of work. The only outlier is, I guess there should be 2, the employee payroll and the property. So if you've got employee payroll, you're going to choose that or property, which you would have put in one of these other categories in your scope of work, which is totally fine. We just have to have specific categories for these 2 since the information you're inputting will be different and require different questions. So let's say this was a goods expense. That's going to, again, pop up certain questions. Should I have chosen employee payroll? That's going to have different questions, right? So I'm going to choose goods expenses, vendor name. We are going to say April Flowers. City is not a required field, but you can type it in. Anything with a red asterisk is required. For the state, you can either click on the drop-down box and choose from the options available, or you can type it in and then hit tab. Item description, so you want to tell us in general, like, what did you purchase? I'm going to say flowers. If there were multiple items, like, try to be as specific as possible. Vendor total amount, so the amount paid with grant funds. If I paid half of it with grant funds and half of it with other funds, I would only report the amount paid with grant funds. So in this case, in this example, we're going to say that the whole invoice was $110. And I want it to match my receipt. So I am going to make sure it matches exactly as how it's stated on my receipt. But let me open up the the sales tax option so that you can see. So I'm going to use this option 1, right? So I paid for my vendor, for my receipt with the grant funds, but I want the sales tax taken out so that I can cover it with other funds. And so I'm going to put the vendor total amount with the sales tax, and it's going to end up saying that I only used $100 of my grant funds, right? So let's say the vendor total was 110 and $10 was sales tax. So since I'm choosing option 1, I'm going to put $10 in sales tax because I am eligible for a tax exemption, and I'm going to separate out the sales tax, pay for it with my general fund, but I want it to match my receipt. And so therefore I'm going to put the full vendor total amount as 110 and the sales tax is 10, and the system will report in my balance that I've only used $100 of the grant funds. Now the purpose note section is how you tell us it's related to your scope of work, but you can also include an invoice and check number. So every time we're reviewing your expenses, we're looking at your scope of work to make sure this was an approved expense. We've already approved it. So in this scenario, we bought flowers and I've got a couple different projects. So I want to be specific about how I refer to what these flowers are going towards, right? So I'm going to say it's for after school program for XYZ school. Right? So if you have multiple programs at different schools, you just want to be as specific as possible so we can look at that expense, look at your scope of work and say, hey, that's where that expense was listed and that we approved it. And that way we don't need to follow up with you to get any clarification. Now, if you wanted to send a copy of your response to your email address, you could, but I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. And what it's doing is it's talking to Smartsheet. It's going to send that expense over there. If I wanted to submit additional expenses, I could just click on this link, make sure the grant ID matches, and then just keep on entering in information. I'm going to go back to Smartsheet and make sure that the expense we submitted is listed. Now, sometimes it'll prompt you to hit refresh, which you can do so here. If it doesn't, you can refresh the page, but if you enter in information, you have to refresh Smartsheet for it to pop up. All right, so I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to scroll over to see if we've got our April flowers. And there we are. April flowers is right there. All right, so we've submitted our expenses for the quarter. Now let's go. We want to fill out our quarterly performance report to tell OSBM what we have been doing this past quarter. So you want to fill out your name, the date that you're filling it out. So today's date's 4/10. You could type it in. You could use a drop down. Your organization, the grant ID, which is at the top of your reporting sheet, and it's the same number as your contract. You want to select the reporting period. So this is for January through March of 2025. Were grant funds expended during this reporting period? Yes. And then you've got 3 certification questions. The goal here is that they should all be yes. If they are no, then we need something to be fixed, right? So the first thing is, do you certify that all grant funds are accounted for separately and not commingled with any other sources of funds? Yes, I've opened up a separate bank account. That's where the grant funds are. There are no other sources of funds there, so I'm saying yes. Do you certify that all expenses to date have been submitted for this grant and are reflected in the associated Smartsheet? Yes, I've submitted all the expenses for this quarter, and it's already on Smartsheet. Now, if you had no expenses and you didn't submit any expenses, you would still say yes because you are certifying that what's on the Smartsheet is correct. Lastly, you have to certify were all funds state used for the purposes for which they were awarded and in compliance with your contract, also part of your contract is the scope of work, right? So were all funds used for the purposes outlined in your scope of work? I say yes. And then the next 4 questions are the narrative portion where you just tell us what's going on that quarter, right? The first one is really general in terms of like what's the overall things that have been going on this quarter. And then the next three are directly related to your scope of work. So your scope of work talked about your objectives. So what objectives did you accomplish or not accomplish, and why? Just give us a brief insight into what's gone on and what has or has not gone on. And then expected results, same thing. Just let us know what expected results you've accomplished thus far. And then lastly is your performance measures. So depending on what type of performance measures you reported in your scope of work, you're going to tell us about that. So if it was related to like a timeline, like the builder's going to start on X date, but they haven't started until further along in the project, like that, this is where you update us on like where you are in that status and why. So like maybe the design process took longer than you expected. Go ahead and tell us that at this point. So you're telling us your timeline and what has changed, or alternatively, if you've got like programmatic performance measures, like people served or like increases in test scores, if you don't have that information quite yet, just tell us about what programmatic information you have so far and when you anticipate having more information, right? So you're just giving us an overall idea as to what's been going on this quarter. How have you been handling these grant funds? What are you waiting on, and so on and so forth. And then I'm going to hit save. And now I know that it's saved to my computer and that the information will be there. So I want to go and submit my quarterly performance report, which means I can click on this link. I can't type in or attach anything on Smartsheet. I have to click this link in order to submit anything. So I'm going to put in my name again. And instead of choosing expense, I'm going to choose quarterly performance report. And since I chose quarterly performance report, these are the questions that are the information that is presented. So there are two ways of going about this. You could drag and drop from your folder, or you could browse files. I'm going to go to the folder where I saved everything. I'm going to double click, and there it is right there. If I accidentally attach the wrong thing, I could press X and reattach something. Also, if you have photos that you want to attach, please do so at this point. We love to see progress photos and to share that with folks as well. Just make sure you're attaching it with one quarterly performance report. You only want to, if you're ever behind, only submit one quarterly performance report at a time. Otherwise, our system will not recognize each of them and it'll show that you're out of compliance. But you can upload photos and multiple things along with your one quarterly performance report. And then lastly, you want to choose the reporting period so that our system recognizes the correct reporting period. And then the year. And then again, you could send a copy of your response by email, but I'm going to hit submit. And if I wanted to continue to submit, or I realized I forgot to submit an expense, I could click on this link and go ahead and put it in. Anytime that you find that something's forgotten and you know there's interest that you forgot to submit, just go ahead and submit it so it's as up to date as possible. Is always the goal. So I'm going to go back to Smartsheet. And it has, well, it did prompt me, but say it didn't prompt me to refresh. I can't, the quarterly performance report is not there yet, even though I hit submit. So I need to refresh the page so that it'll appear. All right, so if I scroll down, I can see there it is, quarterly performance report. And scroll over, it's for the reporting period. And if I wanted to look at the actual form, I could click on the paper clip on the left-hand side, and then it'll pop up the attachment. And there we go. There's my report that I just submitted. There are a couple of handy things, including the sheet summary that I talked about for you to be able to see your balance and if you're in compliance. So there should be a summary tab on the right-hand side of your screen. You probably see fewer icons than we have, but you should have a summary tab. It'll show you your grant amount. It'll add the totals of each category of expense. And then it'll show you your balance. So this is where if you're ready to close out, it needs to be at 0, and you should try to reconcile your records as often as possible to make sure your balance is adding up. Otherwise, you'll want to take a look at your expenses to make sure that everything was entered in correctly. One thing I will say is if you ever need a correction made, please let us know by indicating the item number. So say I accidentally put in an extra 0 for April flowers. I would email my grant administrator that item number 1171 needs to be updated with this information. We prefer the item number rather than the row number, as the row numbers change should you request something to be removed. All right, so back to the sheet summary, I can see the amount that my grant funds included at the beginning. I can see my expenses, my balance. Now I want to see if I am in compliance. All right, so according to this, I am not in compliance. So let's see, my payment date was September 10th, 2024. So let's see what I'm missing. According to the Smartsheet, total QPR due to date is 3, and I've only submitted 1. So let's scroll down so I can see which quarter I'm missing a quarterly performance report. Do that. Okay, so here it's starting to say yes, that it's due. So this means that this is the first quarter I needed to report for, and it's currently missing. And if I keep going, it looks like I'm also missing one for the December reporting period. So what I would do to fix this is just go and fill out that quarterly performance report and submit it and put the right reporting periods, and then you'll be up to date and it'll put you back in compliance. Another helpful thing here is you can actually export this list. So you can't move things around really on your end. So if you wanted to export everything to compare to your internal records, you could hit File, Export. So File on the left-hand side of your screen, go down to Export, export to Microsoft Excel, and then it'll open it up into an Excel document, which you can't enter in information into the Excel doc and upload it, but it does allow you to manipulate it in case you wanted to move things around or hide columns and compare it. There's also a summary tab down here. So that same information that I was showing you is listed on the 3rd tab here, or the 3rd sheet. So you can also access that there. All right, that concludes the demonstration. So we'll get started on this FAQ or the Q&A portion. So if you have any questions and haven't added it in, please go to the question mark box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And we will get to those in just a moment. So will this webinar be recorded? Yes, actually we have recorded this one. We may upload it, but otherwise there is one on our website from a prior recording, so you can always access that. When do I need to start submitting reports? Reporting begins once you've received your grant funds. How do I receive a link to Smartsheet? This will go to your point of contact and contract signer, but we can always provide a link to anyone else in your organization. Just email your grant administrator or ncgrants@osbm.nc.gov. If you cannot find your Smartsheet reporting form, first off, please bookmark it. It's your grant's best friend. You'll need it for the entire cycle of your grant. So please bookmark it. But you can also just go to smartsheet.com. Once you have set up your account, you can go to smartsheet.com and log in from there. And if you forget your password, you just click on Forgot Password. We don't control that. We only provide access. So to the particular sheet. So you'll have to go through that. And then if all else fails, just reach out to your grant administrator and we can help you. Do you need to submit invoices or supporting documentation? No, you do not. However, you have to maintain it for up to 5 years after your project is complete, and it has to be made available should we request it at any point in time. And then lastly, I would just add your Smartsheet is view only, and that is on purpose. We can make edits on your behalf, but you just need to request that to our office. And yeah, I think that covers the main points. Carmen is helping with the Q&A portion of our presentation. Carmen, do we have any questions?
Yes, we have a few. So our first question is from Maureen Mason. When the training is over, can one of you call me? I believe there's a big problem with the grant reporting that dates back to 2023. And Maureen, I did look up, you're with the town of Wadesboro, I believe. I'll send you a request to unmute yourself just to confirm, but I think you're my grantee. And I've sent you a request to unmute yourself, Maureen, if you could just confirm that you're with the town of Wadesboro, and I'll give you a call.
And you do have, oh, there we go. Maureen, I think you're unmuted.
Hi. Yeah, I would just rather not talk about it right now. Just
Sure.
talk about it privately. Can you give me a phone number that I can call someone?
I can reach out to you. I just need you to confirm. I just want to make sure I found the right. Are you with the town of Wadesboro?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yes, I'll give you a call. I have your contact information. I'll give you a call.
All right. Thanks, Carmen.
You're welcome. Okay. And so our next question is from Matt Bonko. If I have 4 grants and we spent $200,000 each, we don't need a yellow book audit for the fiscal year ending in 2025, correct? Or is that wrong?
So that would be $800,000. If you, let's go ahead and request Matt to unmute, because it's also if you're holding any of that money too. It's not just based off of expenses. So state rules require it for if you held, received, or expended. So Matt, I think you're unmuted. Does that help to answer it? Because if you have more than that beyond your expenses in your, like you've held on to that, then you would potentially hit that threshold.
Okay, held, received, or expended. When you add those 3 numbers up, that's what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, I was just trying to make sure I understood how the math worked. And since our fiscal year ends in June and there's part of that fiscal year ending September 30, 2024, I was wondering, is the threshold 750 or is it?
No, so it's only based off of your fiscal year end. So if your fiscal year ends June 30th, 2025, you're looking at this bucket. So did you receive, hold, use, or expend $1 million or more?
Okay.
And then if you receive, and then any fiscal year prior to that, the threshold would be 500,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
So as of right now, that's the last question.
Okay. I don't see any in my inbox.
Oh, actually, I do. I see. Oh no, those already been answered. I have a queue.
Great. I don't see any others either. But feel free to add something again. We got well, we got like 30 seconds left. But so this might end at the perfect time. Thank you all so much for being here. Thanks for getting your reports in. I can't tell you how much we appreciate y'all being here. We spend a lot of time trying to get these resources for you. So thank you for your thorough review and adherence to the rules with your state grant funds. But we're here to help, and please reach out if you need anything. ncgrants@osbm.nc.gov. If you are unsure of who to reach out to that email address, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But yeah, good luck with submitting your reports. Reach out if you need us, and have a great rest of your day. Y'all take care.